we're going to look at using the Object Properties display window. This is a great one to learn how to use because it gives you up-to-date information about objects in your scene. Now, by default, the Object Properties display window is not active. In order to activate it, we need to click on this rainbow-colored ring. Once we activate it, you can see it's just floating in our workspace. Currently, because nothing is selected, it's just giving us some information about the viewport that is active. So currently, the active viewport is a perspective viewport, and it's just telling us the width and height of that viewport, what kind of projection the camera has, and it gives us some additional camera information. As I mentioned, this is a very useful display to have active, so I tend to dock mine just above my layers window off on the right side of my custom workspace. So in order to dock it over on the right, just like the layers window, we just move our cursor up to the top of the toolbar and we just drag it over to the right. And you can see if I just drag it a little bit into this area, I get this tall, vertical, translucent rectangle. If I drag it a little bit more, you can see the rectangle changes, and this gives me an idea of where the window is actually going to dock. Once I release it, you can see it's now docked above the layers window. If I want the layers window to be on top, I can just drag it above the properties window, and there it is docked up there. I'm going to move it back below the properties window for now. You can see at the moment also in the properties window that there is this drag bar, so not all the information in this window is displaying. I can increase the size of the properties display or make it smaller by dragging this vertical arrow up or down. At the moment, since no objects are selected, the properties display is just giving us information about the perspective window. But if I go ahead and click on one of the objects in the window, you can see the display has changed. Let's do a couple of things here. First of all, I'm going to increase the perspective window so that it's the only active viewport that we can see. Remember, we do this by just double-clicking on the actual title bar for the viewport. And now you can see I have the object selected, but I really can't see all the information about the object because the properties display window is too narrow. I can just come over here and float my cursor and then just drag the bar a little bit wider, and now you can see I can see all the information about this particular object. Now you can see at the top there are 4 buttons. The first is Object, the next one Material, then Texture Mapping, and Decals. We're only going to pay attention to the Object button at this point. Again, I have one object in my scene selected, that's the highlighted cube. And if I move my mouse around over here, you can see the object type, it's telling us that it's a closed extrusion. The name is actually a custom name that I typed in there that is specific to that object. If I had multiple cubes in the scene on this layer, it's sometimes nice to give them individual names to make selecting them or identifying them easier. If I come down here, you can see it's telling me that the layer that this object is on is the solids layer. And from here, I can actually change the layer that this part is on. So I could select layer 03, and you can see immediately the object changes to blue, which if I move my layer window up just a little bit here, you can see the color for layer 3 is this royal blue. I'll just use this command again to switch it back to solids. And now it's changed back to red. I know it's on the solids layer. Display color can be a handy flyout to use. What this allows you to do is to still keep an object on a specific layer, but it allows you to change the color that that object is displayed in, even though it stays on that layer. So now you can see it's still on the red solid layer, but that cube is displaying in green. This can be very handy if you have to keep all of your parts on one layer and you want to help identify things. It can get a little confusing if you have layers that are the same colors as the display colors that you're selecting. Sometimes you might think an object is on a different layer than it is just by the color it's displayed in. So typically I will keep that on the default, which is by layer. These next 3 pull downs we'll look at in a little more detail later. But essentially they give you control over how your objects individually print when you do go to print them. Custom mesh we'll also look at later. If I make this window a little bit larger, you can see there's a couple of other things that we want to take a quick look at. The first is this Show Surface ISO with the check mark. You can see if I uncheck this, that immediately all the isoparms on that surface disappear. Now the same information is there, it is strictly how the object is being displayed to us. So if I click that back on, you can see it's now gone back to showing the isoparms. I can increase the isoparm density by clicking on this up-down arrow here. Let me go ahead and deselect this cube and instead select this cylinder. If I come over here, you can see again density is set to 1, and I can uncheck or check the box on that to display or not display the isoparms. I'll go ahead and change the density on this to 3 or 4, and you can see every time I click, it's actually changing the number of isoparms that are shown on this particular object. Now keep in mind this is not changing any of the information in the object, it's strictly changing how the object is displayed to us. This can be handy to help us distinguish shapes from another shape, or sometimes we do screen grabs of data, and this really helps to identify the shapes of an object to a user who may not be familiar with what you're working on. I'll go ahead and reselect that, and I'll just take that back down to 1 isoparm density. While I have this selected, we'll look at this detail button here. If I click on this, you can see it's giving me a lot of information, but the truly important parts of this is right here where it says geometry. Under geometry, it tells me it's a valid polysurface. It also tells me it's a closed solid polysurface with 3 surfaces. It has 3 surfaces because it's a cylinder. It has the bottom, the top, and the round cylinder shape only counts as 1 actual surface. If I click and deselect this, and now select the cylinder next to it, you can see they look very similar, but when I click on details, this now tells me under geometry, it's still a valid polysurface, but now it's just a polysurface with 2 surfaces. It's no longer listed as a closed polysurface. And the reason for this is, in this particular example, this top piece is not joined to the lower section. If I do details on this, you can see under geometry, it's just a valid trimmed surface. So I can take this surface and the rest of the cylinder and click on my icon over here to join the parts. And now if I hit details, it's showing me that it's a valid polysurface and it's a closed solid polysurface and it has 3 surfaces. This is now joined and this is what's considered a watertight surface. The match command is kind of a nice command. Let's say I had taken this current object and I had it switch so it was green and I had it on, let's say, layer 5. And I also had the density of this set up to 5. So it's very different than everything else in the scene. With it selected and I click on the match button, I have all these different options that I can match to a different object that I click on. For now, I'm just going to leave everything to the default settings and click OK. So now anything I click in my viewport, the green object is going to take those display characteristics. So I'll just click on the red cube. You can see as soon as I click on it, this cylinder has now changed its layer to solids, its display color is now by layer, and now its isoparm density is set to 1, and they are visible. This works in a similar way for curves. If I click on the curve, you can see the curve is on the default layer, and the display color is set to by layer. If I click on details for this, it tells me what type of curve it is. It's a valid curve, and it's also an open NURBS curve. If I deselect that, and I go ahead and click on the purple curve, and hit details, you can see this is a valid curve again. This time it's a closed polyline. Now a polyline is a curve made up of multiple lines. Everywhere there's a sharp corner, that is a different line, and because it's a polyline, these lines are all joined together. I could explode this. I'll hit my middle mouse button to get to my mouse pop-up, and click explode. And now you can see when I click on these, they're all individual lines. Let me just look at the details for this. You can see it's a valid curve, so it's a singular curve. I just do a dragging box around these, and again hit the middle mouse button, and this time hit join. You can join those back together, and you can see now it's listed back again as a closed polycurve with 5 curved segments. And of course, with lines, all the same things apply to these as they did the surfaces. I can change the layer colors. I can change what layer they're on. And I can also match the information on these. This time I'll go ahead and match it to this layer. So now you can see it's changed that polyline to the default layer, and the display color is by layer. So that's a look at the Object Properties display menu.